Hello, and welcome to the Healthy Work and Workplaces podcast hosted by the Healthy Work Research Unit at Aston University. I'm your host and head of the research unit, Dr Simon McCabe. Today's guest is Paul Jones. He is a part-time DBA student in the Department of Work and Organisation within the Business School. Prior to beginning his DBA, Paul held the position of Senior Research Manager at Aston University. We are delighted to have him with us today to talk over his pathway into wellbeing research and his current work. Paul, welcome.
Great, it's great to be here.
So we like to start these episodes with a question where you essentially tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump into the kind of the nitty-gritty of the projects and the work that you've been involved in. So can you briefly tell us about your background, kind of what got you into the world of well-being, and kind of how did you end up where you are now?
Yeah, so I was reflecting on this before the podcast. When I was younger, there was two pathways for me. One was interior design and one was psychology, because I was always interested in people. I was always interested in the idea of spending other people's money to make things look nice as well. Decided to go down the psychology pathway, but the original route was going to be educational psychology. So I had a plan in place, become an educational psychologist, do my degree, do my master's degree in educational psychology, do my teacher training, all the pathway laid out. When I started my degree in behavioral science, which covered anthropology, sociology, and psychology, the more I found out about educational psychology, the more I thought that's not quite for me. I was more interested in the more work-based practices psychology could use then. So I changed my mind to go down the occupational psychology pathway, did my degree, then went on to do my first qualification in human resource management. And that was really to get on to the master's degree in occupational psychology then. Wanted to get the HR qualification, get some experience out there being in the workplace. And I thought that would be an ideal way to then go on to the occupational psychology qualification as an MSc. Got into Cardiff University to do that. And it was really nice for me to be able to have some work-based experience, to be able to think about those work psychology practices and what had come about in those workplace experiences then. So did that. The pathway was always going to be occupational psychology. But all the things I've done, education-wise, have been around people. So I went on to do a counselling course and postgrad certificate in counselling skills. And also did my teacher training here effectively, so higher education, teacher and learning qualification at Aston. So everything for me has always been geared towards people-orientated practices. Rather than going down the doctoral path straight away, I wanted to get a portfolio of qualifications that then give me a broad spread of skills and knowledge to go into the workplace, rather than a singular focus, which a doctor can be sometimes then. Mm-hmm. In terms of experiences as well, I think that besides education, I've gained lots of experience. I've got private sector, public sector, third sector, and also been self-employed. So those experiences have stood me in good stead because I've worked in HR-specific roles and organizations, got lots of experience in terms of recruitment, redundancies, having to sack people on the spot and march them out immediately. There's been lots of experiences from that side, but also then working in learning and development roles, the nicer side of HR practice and work psychology, where helping people develop. And that's what's really I've enjoyed across my career then, is helping people, whether it's coaching, mentoring, putting together training courses, developing people. That's always been what's really made me happy in terms of a workplace job. And what's good for me is that those qualifications have covered a number of areas. But if there was some kind of Venn diagram that existed in my head, they all overlap in some way and complementary, so that I can see different things because I brought all those things together then. The last 15 years, besides doing those roles of HR, work psychology, consultancy, being self-employed, I've spent in higher education then, so worked in Cardiff University, particularly around employability. Then for the last 10 years, I've been in Aston University. So I've done a various selection of roles at Aston, business development, managed research systems at Aston, been the senior research manager for the last 4 years and moved across to a teaching role more recently, which builds on teaching experience I've had previously then.
So one of the things that I think comes across in what you just said is this tremendous focus on kind of real world, what is it like out there, very practical. And I think that may be potentially one of the things that has directed you towards the DBA rather than a PhD. So just for our listeners, can you kind of outline the difference between a DBA and a PhD, because they might be interested in going for one or the other, and then explain kind of why you went for the DBA and what it entails, what is it all about?
Yeah, so I think the biggest difference between the two, so with a PhD, it's always about the contribution to theory. So you'll have a research project in mind where you're trying to develop or add into the pool of theory that exists. You're finding your little niche then. And it's very similar with a DBA, only there's more to it. It's not just the focus on theory, there's the element of putting things into practice, so the impact part of that then. And that's what really appealed to me about the DBA, was the fact that I could research something. But for me, I don't just want to do research, I want something to happen from it. I like the ability when I've been in workplaces to think about, right, if I do something, what's the knock-on effect? How can we measure that? What's going to be good about that? What doesn't work? How can we improve it for the future? So with the DBA, you get to do that then. It tends to be a work-placed doctorate, so professional doctorate. We have a number of different ones at Aston that are based around that type of mechanism. And for me, that's the exciting part then. I want to think about the research, because that's really important. But I want to do something with it. I don't want other people to do something with it. I want to be the one responsible for that then. Mm-hmm. So my doctorate's focused on the professional development of academic staff. Through my experiences of working at Aston University, I've seen the good parts of an organisation and the bad parts of what we can do better then. So that drove me to want to look at the professional development of academic staff. We do some good things at Aston, but there's always room for improvement. And I could see there was room there. And I thought, right, well, if I research this, I can talk to staff, I can find out what their opinions are, and work from the ground up rather from the top down, which is the way a lot of universities work. So I'm really interested in to speak to people. And it goes away from that psychology training I had when I was younger, which all those years ago, when I was doing my first degree and onwards, it was very much a quantitative pathway and telling you psychology is done this way. You use surveys, you measure things, you use quantitative analysis then to work out, looking at lots of people to work out then what can apply to an individual. Mm-hmm. But for me, this was an opportunity to move away from that training previously. And part of the training we did for the DBA was thinking about the different types of methodologies that exist, what your basis was in terms of your approach to research. Now, I'd always been taught in that previous way of doing things. But for this, it was really important to me. I spoke to people on the ground. I didn't want to just create a survey and already put my thoughts on what that survey would be and direct people down a pathway. I wanted to get a feeling for what people were experiencing on the ground, what mattered to them, what they felt would be good, bad, or indifferent about their current experiences, and how we could make it better then. So I tried to take a more pathway of talking to people, doing interviews, and then finding out from them, and the process would be going through a thematic analysis to try and analyze what the themes are there then. But the exciting part for me, once the research is finished and the thematic analysis is done, the exciting part, particularly for me, is that moving towards a plan of action, looking at the themes that have come through, but then what can we do differently? What's best practice out there in different organizations? But what can we do that is Aston specific? What's the creative parts about using the Aston knowledge I've gained over the last 10 years? And thinking, right, I want to create something that's good practice that people have told me that we need, but also put a creative Aston spin on those things then. So that's the really important part to me. So what I try to do with the research is look at elements that can influence. So there's one model in particular I've used, which is Fran's engaged scholarship model, to think about all the different elements of what an academic member of staff would do. And I focused on teaching and research staff, because I think looking at all the different contract types we have, those people who are trying to balance teaching, research, engagement, all those other parts of administration that they have to do, they've probably got the most complicated journey in terms of how we help them to succeed in all those different aspects then. So it would be professional pathways for the teaching side. There's professional pathways for the research side. There's probably things we think about on the engagement side that people have to do. There's a lot of things there where people are being measured and asked to do things, but I don't think the structure is in place to get the best out of people and help support them in the right way. So that's the exciting part for me, as well as thinking about the external influences. So we get measured through schemes like the Knowledge Exchange Framework, the Research Excellence Framework, the Teaching Excellence Framework. Do they have an influence? One of the exciting parts for me is thinking, there's a lot of people who work in academic jobs who've been in academia all their life. There's a lot of people who've worked out in industry like myself who come into academia. One of the gaps I want to find is, are people bringing skills from the workplace out in industry, whether it's public or private or third sector? Are there things they bring into the workplace that are useful that we don't really know about yet, but they find useful on a daily basis? Then we could weave into their practice then. So we could think, right, well, you brought these skills with you. These are really benefiting you. How can we weave those skills into what we train you to do and how we develop you in the workplace then?
Perfect. So it sounds like you're bringing these people in that may have alternative ways of doing things. And just to kind of drill down into a little bit more about the specifics of your DBA, Um, can can you tell us a little bit more about who's involved? So you mentioned you've got teaching and research staff,
Yeah.
and you mentioned you've potentially got people coming in from industry. It's a series of interviews.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of kind of the number of people involved, who they are, where they come from, and maybe some of the kind of questions that you're asking them?
Yeah. So far, there's been 19 interviews taking place. It covers a range from people who are at the lecturer level, and then I got people then who are senior lecturer, reader, and also professor. So I'm getting input from all levels of staff, and for me, that was important. Obviously, I'm at the whims of people who want to volunteer to be part of the research. But luckily, given I've been around Aston, then I've got a good network of people that are interested in the research, because there's a lot of interest in trying to make these types of things work. But also people who I've known that have been interested in helping me because they've got a personal relationship with them. And that's one of the things that is good for DBA students. They tend to be based in organizations. So the access to data and talking to people or doing surveys and things tends to be easy. And that's one of the differences with a PhD study as well, is it can sometimes be harder to get people to do the actual data collection part of things. So from that perspective, I had a wide range of people doing it, and from various different departments as well. So there's a good spread across the college. I did focus on our college in particular, so business and social sciences, to try and control the elements of it. There being different cultures in different colleges and being different ways of thinking. We still have 3 different schools within our college. So there's still some differences in terms of the culture and the way departments are set up and the climate that exists. But at least by controlling it by using just the college, there's at least some control mechanisms. But what's good about my DBA, but also bad about the DBA as well, the type of thing I'm researching has so many different things that can influence it. I got to be really specific in terms of what I want to concentrate on, what I want to reflect on, what literature I want to use, because there's a variety of different things, even just looking at things like culture and climate, looking at training and development mechanisms, the way people learn. There's already a massive amount of literature I can be looking at to try and weave in. And that's not accounting for various other things that could be going on within the workplace, whether there's changes of processes, changes of staff, changes of structure. There's a whole variety of things that could be influencing things. So trying to tease out and put boundaries on what I'm doing, that's been a really important part of that journey as a doctoral student. Dan.
Absolutely. I think it's one of those things that we run into as researchers, which is kind of what, as you mentioned, what is the boundary or the remit of what I'm trying to do here? Because we can't examine simply, a handful of people from the business school, figure out what works and what doesn't for them, and then apply it to other places, because there are specific cultural norms. There are specific, you mentioned the different benchmarks that they're held against will be different versus other academic members of staff. So tailoring it is it's kind of a double-edged sword in that you have specific recommendations for what works for this particular kind of an academic, but obviously there is a limit to what can be generalized beyond that. But to move on to the next set of questions, I want to talk about once those interview questions have been asked and once you've got the data and once you've got the transcripts, you mentioned you're doing thematic analysis. Can you just explain to our listeners kind of what that entails? And I'm curious because I've seen a lot of this in the news lately. If you're planning to use or have used any AI tools to kind of assist with that?
Yeah, so one of the AI tools I've used recently is for doing the transcriptions for the interviews. So there's a tool called Otter where you can put your transcript or put the record into that. It will generate the transcript for you. So I've been trying to work out how effective that is in terms of saving me time and the usefulness of it. It probably does a good job of 65% of the transcription generally. The other 35%, if I got my maths right, which I think I should have, should be a case of you going through that recording again and again to work out the difficult parts. The software is very good at picking up all the easy bits to understand. I'm left with doing the difficult bits then. So where someone's mumbled or the recording hasn't worked properly, or the terminology is something that the AI isn't used to, then I'm listening to those things over and over again. So even though the tool is doing some work for me, I'm still going through the full recording, make sure it's an accurate representation of that conversation, and then really honing down those difficult parts then. I've known people before will send things off to transcribers, do the work for them. It was very important to me that I had some sense of control over that then. I've probably made a harder job for myself by taking this pathway. I'm sure my bank manager will be happy. I've been spending all the money on transcription. But for me, getting close to the data, understanding it and trying to pick up the themes already, so my mind is more active on all the things that have been mentioned. And it's amazing, listen to the interviews, even though I was present and was there, your mind is listening, but maybe you're concentrating on what questions to ask and thinking as an interviewer, rather than just being there and listening intently. Mm-hmm. So it's nice to go through the interviews again and again to understand it more and to get close to that data then. So the process will be, once they're all transcribed, to start to go through all the transcripts. Then once they've been anonymized and you can't tell whose interview is who, and that's a long process as well to make sure everybody is anonymized through that journey, particularly when they're giving very personal information. There's a decision to make on how much you have to take out then, even if it's useful, to make sure that anonymization takes place. Where I'll be going through then using software like NVivo to identify the themes and then to whittle those themes down to the main ones that I want to use to try and think about those messages. Also pulling out quotes then that I can be able to use that really sort of are good examples of those themes coming through then. So coding things throughout each interview to make sure they can be relevant for each theme, and then trying to do my analysis around those things then. The other part to triangulate all of that then is analysing what is available in the university. One of the interesting parts for me is seeing where the gaps are, where we think we could do a better job, but also knowing what the university does do for people, what's available in terms of help if you go looking for it, but that people aren't using for some reason. Mm-hmm. So that's another part of the analysis I want to do, is that I want to know where it exists totally right across the university, because if it exists and people aren't using it, that's a different problem to solve than if it doesn't exist already. So there's a number of ways you can tackle that. So that's going to be another important element of looking at what we do. Are people using the things available? What isn't available? And having this grander plan then of what we can do to make people's lives better within the workplace in terms of development. But also you mentioned earlier about within psychology, we try and find ways to help as many people as possible through our theories. Where every single individual has a different journey, they have a different way they want to learn or do different things. And even this week, I was talking to students about this right at the start of their journey into a degree. Each of them needs to have a way to be able to think about how they structure their week. I told them all we don't expect them to be working 24 hours a day to do all their Aston coursework. That journey as a student is really important to get a balance right of making connections, making friends, but scheduling time to do your work on a regular basis. And for any academic as well, I want to find ways to make them more efficient and effective, but try and find something that there's broad scope to help everybody, but also how can we make it more personalized to those individuals? How do we take account of their learning needs? And how do we weave that into some kind of development program then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And I think it's consistent with a lot of, like you mentioned, theory out there, which points to autonomy being and that sense of personalization and ownership, or having the ability to express individual choice, being one of the things that leads to motivation and therefore greater performance, productivity, and all those kinds of things. So moving on now to the findings or kind of emerging themes. You mentioned that thematic analysis is taking what the people have said and trying to pick up the recurring patterns, the things that people continually return to, either both within their own transcript or across transcripts. Can you talk a little bit about some of the themes that have emerged and what that might mean for recommendations or concrete steps moving forward?
It's very preliminary at the moment because I haven't done the full analysis, but you can definitely see things starting to emerge. I think the journey for academics, there's lots of things for early career academics, and even if you went back to PhD students, there are things we teach people right from PhD level or doctoral level, and then expect them to go on to academic roles. But there are gaps there. We train people as independent researchers at a PhD or doctoral level, but then as soon as they go into roles, we expect them to work in teams, we expect them to be able to do external engagement. We don't really teach them those skills as part of the doctoral journey then, as an effective part of the training courses we provide or the supervision experience then. Some people might get it, but it's more by accident than rather a structured process thinking, we're preparing you to go into an academic role, and these are the gaps that you will need to be filling for that. There are probably courses out there that students can sign up to try and fill some of those gaps, but don't think we emphasize that these skills are necessary as you go into roles for the future then. But I think that journey going through, there's things for early career researchers. We try and put some emphasis on training people up from that perspective. But as you climb the ladder, I think less and less focus is put on that development journey then. So once you reach reader or professor, you can go looking for opportunities, but don't think the environment is one where we expect people to be continually developing. I think it almost seems as if people have reached the peak of what they're doing because they've reached, say, professor level.
Mm-hmm.
There might be still gaps in terms of the knowledge, the skills, the abilities they've got over time. We're not putting that much of a focus sometimes then on saying, right, well, how do we give you time to develop new skills or find more efficient ways of doing things or get up to speed on new things that are being done then? There isn't that focus on that. For me, I want to keep learning until I reach the age of 80 or 90, whatever age I get to in life, because learning for me has always been a very important part of my life. Even outside of work or outside doing the DBA, I'm always watching things on YouTube or reading things that help me to learn. If I see new computer tools, I'm interested in learning them. When I was off on holiday, when I had some annual leave recently, I spent some of my time doing some research on all the different AI tools that are coming out. Every single day on my Instagram feed, there are tens or hundreds of new AI tools coming out. So for me, I'm really interested in what is developing out there in the world and how I can use them, but also really keen to pass those skills on as well. So my idea is, if I do some reviews of AI tools, if I find things that are really useful, I can pass those details on to my colleagues to make their lives easier. There will be good things that come out, there'll be bad things that come out. But I like to keep abreast of those things so I can try and pass on those skills as well as learn things myself then. Going back to what the question was about findings as well, I think that for me, when I've experienced both this organization and others, there's quite a lot of pressure from top down telling people what we expect them to do. And that falls into the roles of KPIs, what we get measured on. And when we are measured on research, teaching, and knowledge exchange, those will obviously be drivers of what we have to marry our ability to practice things within the university to marry that up with what the external expectations are. But I'm really keen that we pay attention to the skills that people bring into the university and also how we develop those skills more widely then. So for me, having some kind of ability to monitor what people bring in, so when they start with the university, we understand what their strengths and their abilities are and get a wide set of skills that's available, so we can try and tap into that knowledge then. Well, how it tends to work in lots of organizations is you get employed to do a job, there's a person specification and a job description, you get employed to do it, and you're measured on that job. We don't think wider, thinking, right, well, you've got a wealth of other skills and experience. How can we utilize that within the organization and make use of those skills then? And I've just been writing a book chapter about strengths and how we utilize strengths and how we develop people down a strengths-based way. And for me, departments or schools or colleges, I would love it if we had an ability to treat it more like a football team where you had different players where each of them had strengths and you form your team based on that and you recruit to fill the gaps and build the areas that you're not so strong on. So you could have people who are very good on publications, people who are very good on bringing money in, people who are very good on supervising students or knowledge exchange or impact. And at the moment, there's an expectation that everybody's good at everything. But for me, I'd much rather see a strength-based approach where you get an overview of the team and you build that team together, knowing where the gaps are. And overall, you get a much better effective way of utilizing what people are good at, what they're motivated by, and how we get the best out of them, rather than forcing people to try and be good at everything, because we end up where we take them away what they're really good at, and they spend much more time, almost like the Pareto principle of having to learn how to do that bit to get up to an average standard, rather than thinking, right, well, you're really good at these things. Let's give you the space and time to be really good at these. We'll find other people that can fill those other gaps in. And that's an ideal romanticized view of it, but I think that there's literature there to show that that could be a really good pathway. And for me, that makes sense from just looking at it, sense of validity of thinking, right, well, if you're really good at these things and you really enjoy it, if we have all the people doing things they really enjoy and are really good at them, we cover all the different skills we need, that would be great. It's almost like we need a university reset or an organizational reset to say, we're just going to start from scratch and say, right, these are all the things we need to achieve as a college or as a university. And then we bring in the people that can do the skills, but based around the skills they got, rather than being the old-fashioned, this is the job hierarchy, this is the job you need to do. We understand the skills that are available, but we recruit based on the need to fill the skills rather than specific jobs then.
That's really interesting. And I mean, my initial response is it's interesting and potentially really beneficial, but also kind of controversial, just because it goes against the grain and the tradition of kind of the established model of how we do these kinds of things. But it makes a lot of sense when you do look at the literature and you look at personal growth and all those kinds of things. We, as you mentioned, tend to get people into the university, and then we say, how many publications are you getting out per year? What is your external grant funding situation looking like?
Yeah.
We measure your impact. And what you're suggesting is that there's a whole bunch of other strengths that we don't really tap into. But if we had scales or ways to assess that, we could figure out what is lacking in our departments and recruit based on that. And kind of, to take the football analogy a little bit further, it's almost, you have this transfer market where you say, we've got an abundance of this. Can we sell this person off and then get somebody else in? So yeah, super interesting. But I suppose that kind of thing, again, you mentioned the reset there, and I do think it's a big ask, isn't it, in some ways, because you are asking to fundamentally rethink the way that we do all of this stuff. And then there needs to be valid tools to assess these strengths. We need to make sure that all strengths are appropriately covered. So, it sounds super interesting. I think that what I want to move on now, just in the interests of time, are kind of what's next for you. So you've clearly paid a lot of attention to development and thought about kind of the career journey. So it wouldn't surprise me if you have planned out your next step. Can you tell us a little bit about what's coming next for Paul Jones?
Yeah, there's a few things to unpack there. So one of the things I'm involved with in the university, which I think is useful to mention, is I chair the wellbeing group in the university. And I think that's really important for me for a number of reasons. One, I really believe in trying to create a workplace that we are effective and efficient in terms of what we do and we succeed, but also finding ways to give people that good work-life balance then. So that's why I took on chairing the group, and I've been doing it for the last couple of years, is to try and have some kind of input into the way the university works, and at least at a college level, try and make things better for people. And why it interests me in particular is it links nicely into the work and organisation group and the Healthy Workplaces unit. So I think there's a role we can play as a department and as a research unit to make things better in the university. But I'm also keen that we use the research unit in ways that can go outside the university and make a difference. That's what Aston's all about, is trying to serve our beneficiaries, whether it's the students, whether it's external businesses, all the people we can interact with and make a positive difference. I really believe in that message. And this is one way that we can do that through that research unit and be able to influence things. So I'm on a UK staff wellbeing network as well, which has been set up over the last 6 months to last 12 months in between that time. And I'm trying to embed more people from the network now out into the network now to try and make a difference. And I could see the Healthy Workplaces unit trying to help other universities to think about well-being and being a real core for what we can do to help universities, then extend that further out into workplaces as much as possible. We already do bits and pieces on that, but having a more structured view of having a plan to help organizations tap into all the SMEs locally that we help, or the big national corporations that we got relationships with, that would be really exciting for me to have that Healthy Workplaces research unit be a core place that people think about when we can help to do things around well-being or all the other related areas where we can have an influence then. The other thing I'm interested in doing as well internally is trying to find links with other places within the college and wider university. So I've already talked to colleagues within social sciences and humanities about doing work on bibliotherapy. They've got an English languages and applied linguistics department. They've got a PhD student, Mel Wardle-Woodend, who was the poet laureate for Staffordshire. Her and Marcello Giovanelli are doing work on bibliotherapy and looking at the ways we can influence people through books, through poetry, through writing, to try and make their lives better. There's definitely links with what we do as a department and trying to use some of those skills to put them into workplaces and try and use some of those techniques to make a difference. So that's really interesting for me, and trying to find those links between departments. Having worked in the university for a long time and done different roles, it's easy for me to see those connections. So I'm really keen to make the most of that and tell colleagues about it and try and find those links then. On a personal note, the key things for me would be around firstly completing the doctorate, because as much as it's an enjoyable process, it also feels like a lodestone around my neck, which I'm sure all PhD or doctoral students feel like. So doing that, I've got ideas about my senior fellowship within the HEA as well. I've been doing some refresher training on my psychometrics, so I can start to use them a bit more. So I've done my level A and level B training previously, but also the chartered status, both for the CIPD and for my occupational psychology, knowing the hoops I have to jump through to get the chartered status then. So those are the key things on my agenda at the moment.
Yeah. Well, Paul, thank you very much for talking to us today. I think that one of the things that I've taken away from this is sort of an unconventional route to where you are now on the DBA. And we've had previous guests on the show. Karen Mayer was another one who took a different route. So as you mentioned earlier, it's the model is undergraduate, master's, PhD, and then into academia. And it doesn't have to be like that. And I think that what you've spoken about today will hopefully convey that to our audience. So thinking about advice for our students and somebody that might want to go into the area of wellbeing broadly, do you have anything to say to kind of the next wave of people that might be involved in this area?
There were three key things, 4 C's I thought of earlier in terms of giving some advice to people. So the first one was about connection. So I did mention this earlier, that ability to network, make connections. A lot of the success I've seen happen for academic staff, but also people in industry in different areas or the public sector. It's all about the people you know quite often. Still to this day, when I try and get problems resolved, I will still pick up the phone and talk to a person. And I've already built relationships with people, so I'll always take the opportunity to get to know people. And even at the start of undergraduate studies, I've tried to emphasize to people, that's really important to connect with those people around you, to make connections now. Because they could be connections you hold for the rest of your life. And if they can get that right now at the start of their studies on a degree, then that will put them in a good position for the rest of their time then. But the same with PhD students or doctoral students generally, that ability to network, to be confident, to go out there and just to meet people and ask questions, that's really important. So the other C I had was about that confidence, and that's something that people have to work on developing then. So if we take network as an example, that ability to go up to a complete stranger and just introduce themselves and just ask questions, be curious, that's really important then, to find ways to build the confidence and to keep practicing it. One of the tools the CIPD gives to its members, for instance, is online. They've got an elevator pitch builder, so you can build your elevator pitch to go to someone and have a minute or two where you really get to the nub of who you are as a person, what you're about, and what you're trying to do there. So that's a useful tool to go and to think about how you can position yourself to others. The bit I mentioned just now as well was the third C, curiosity. I think that just being curious, asking questions. We see a lot of students at undergrad level and postgraduate level who aren't asking questions, who aren't being curious. They're paying good money to be here, and we're really keen to give them the best education that they can have at Aston. But there needs to be a curiosity there to want to investigate, to read things, and to ask questions. And the more people can develop that, the better in terms of their long-term success, I think that will stand them in good stead. And the last one then, and we've mentioned this earlier, was continuous development. That's really important to me, and I try to talk to everybody about that idea that we should always be developing. There's always new things to learn. The world doesn't stand still. The more we can get into the habit of reflecting on things, learning new things, going out there and finding things that will aid our development, aid our work, aid our personal life, that's really important to me. So if there's one thing I always talk to people about, it tends to be that, and about getting people excited about learning new things, going out and exploring what the world's got to offer, and just setting time aside to do that. And I think one of the things I would love to see happen is giving more time to staff to focus on that. It's something that happens within schools where there's a real focus on continuing professional development, not as much in our education sector. So there's one practice I could bring from school-based education, so secondary and primary, is that focus on those skills and that CPD element.
Great. So if you could go back in time and talk to a younger version of yourself, is there any specific piece of advice you would give, or anything you might have done differently?
Loads, probably. There's been a lot of things in my life I look back think, I could have changed that. I think being more organized when I was doing my studies, and I was giving some advice to students this week, so I felt a bit like Gandalf as a wizard looking back at my time years and years ago. But I think for me, being more organized, trying to be structured in my work, trying to find the mechanisms that help me be more effective. When I was doing my degree in other courses, I learned over time what type of things suited me in terms of learning styles. And I'm a very visual person, so I use mind maps and find ways to try and remember information that way. So that's one of the key things, is trying to find my own way of doing stuff that benefits me as early as possible. when I was doing my degree, I was talking about it this week, things were very different. I had to go to the library, use a computer everybody's waiting to use to find where the journal was held. Then I'd rush off to find the journal, only to realize someone else took it out at that point in time and wasn't where it used to be. There's a lot more tools available now to do stuff online, but it's just finding the way to make use of those tools and to organize yourself and to find the best ways to make notes and find the ways to recall information and to help yourself. And that reflective journey, that ability to be self-reflective and focus on development, I would try and get myself reading those things earlier and give myself some more guidance on that then.
Great, thank you very much. We've been speaking to Paul Jones, part-time DBA student in the Department of Work and Organisation within the Business School at Aston University. Paul, thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. I've been your host, Simon McCabe, Head of the Healthy Work Research Unit at Aston University. We hope you'll tune in next time, and please check out our previous episodes. Goodbye.